দর্শক আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি চ্যানেল 24 এর নিয়মিত আয়োজন মুখোমুখিতে। মুখোমুখিতে প্রতি পর্বে আমাদের সাথে একজন দেশি কিংবা বিদেশি অতিথি থাকে, আমরা কথা বলি সে অতিথির সাথে। আজকে আমাদের সাথে আছে ঢাকায় জাতিসংঘের আবাসিক প্রতিনিধি কোয়েন লুইস। ওয়েলকাম টু দ্য শো। হাউ আর ইউ?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and it's going to be your first appearance on the television.
That's right, in Bangladesh anyway, yes.
And you're excited?
I'm very excited, yes.
Yeah,
really
me
looking
too.
forward.
Let's start the discussion with the recent Rohingya issue, which is one of your prime area of job, and you focus on it. So, what's going on in the border? It's really scary. So, do you think the Myanmar government or any part of the Myanmar trying to push rest of the Rohingyas to the Bangladesh, or it is something else?
You're right, it really is frightening what's happening at the border, and what we do know is that the tensions are escalating between the de facto Myanmar government and the Arakan army in Rakhine, and that's creating a lot of issues, and the ceasefire has broken down. So we are very worried, but right now there's no information that the current government of Myanmar are trying to push Rohingya across the border. It seems that civilians are being caught in the crossfire. We know that a young man was killed in Bangladesh, which was really terrible, and my condolences to his family. 5 other people were injured. There was also more shooting again at the weekend from helicopters, but up until now there really doesn't seem to be any information that this is a concerted effort or an intentional move by the de facto authorities in Myanmar. So we're just trying to really promote the protection of women and children and civilians in Myanmar, and really hope that this fighting will stop soon.
Right. And do you think Myanmar is trying to scare the neighbors, or they put us into a war? What is, I mean, is there any findings, or how do you find their intentions or movement?
Well, again, we know that the Tejgaon, the Arakan armies, the ceasefire has fallen through, but I don't think, again, we have any information that it's more than that. So it seems to be really hostilities between the Arakan army and the Myanmar de facto authorities. I have to say I really, really appreciate the position of the Bangladeshi government, both as an individual but also as the United Nations, calling for calm, calling for discussion, because really that's the right approach in this situation. And hopefully things will calm over the next days, and we really are concerned again about civilians and movement of people inside Rakhine. I know that there has been people displaced from their homes yet again, and there really is a humanitarian issue on the ground.
Right. This will linger the repatriation, right?
There's been ongoing discussions that have been led by the government of Bangladesh along with Myanmar authorities to talk about repatriation. With the ongoing fighting, obviously it makes the situation more unclear. It's not easy to see how it can happen. But what I can say, and again some of my colleagues visited last week in Bangladesh to talk about the efforts that are being made to find solutions for people in northern Rakhine, and also to try and keep that discussion alive, and we will continue to work on that. It's our priority. I know it's the government's priority as well, so it might not seem easy right now, but it's obviously key, because not only is it important for people to want to go home, as much as every single Rohingya that I have met has been grateful to the government and to the people of Bangladesh.
Right, that's obvious. So let's look into something else apart from the Rohingyas. I think there is a hearing going on the enforced disappearance on Geneva, and 21 member states and around 700 cases is there. Bangladesh is one of those. How do you find Bangladesh's position and answer to the suggestions or the questions made by the Human Rights Commissioner in the disappearance hearing?
So there's a working group on enforced disappearances that is in place in Geneva. It's an independent group, so obviously I follow, but it's really not anything within my purview. So there's 81 cases at the moment that are open. And there's a communication with the government of Bangladesh. These are cases that are raised by families of people in Bangladesh, and so that conversation is ongoing at the moment. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, was here. She talked about the importance of having an independent human rights commission in Bangladesh. This is a global standard, so it's something that's asked of all countries. Because it's seen as a good practice, because it's independent, obviously, but it's also impartial and credible to families, to people who may have concerns that they want to raise. So it's not targeted only at Bangladesh, it's a general comment. So how the government has taken that information or how they reacted, I am not privy, so that's obviously a decision for them to make.
So how these things happen? Because I mean, WGEID, the whole thing, how this procedure takes place?
It's a working group on enforced and involuntary disappearances, and it's again an independent body. So they take cases of people who have exhausted all recourse with their own government and appeal to them. It's called a special procedure in United Nations talk. What it basically means is there's a mechanism or a system in place to allow communication between people and the government if people feel that their issues or their concerns of enforced disappearances or involuntary disappearances are not taken into account. So it's the working group looks at the individual cases. There's a group of 5 experts who decide on those cases, again, completely independent, nothing to do with the UN here in Bangladesh. And then the government, there's a dialogue, but there's a time limit. So within 6 months, there has to be a response. So that's the process. I know the government is working hard to respond, and there's a dialogue. I don't really know what the outcome of any of those processes.
In the briefing, when the Human Rights Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, was here, she expressed a concern on the pre-election situation. Was the concern was on the based of anything, or it's just it's a regular concern?
Well, unfortunately, we've seen quite a lot of political violence being reported in the media. It's very prevalent in the Bangladeshi media, so I think she picked up on that during her visit. And obviously, as part of our role in the UN, we try and highlight preventative measures and highlight concerns so things don't get worse. And I think as part of her trip here, she wanted to say she's noted this and to put it on the table as something that maybe more support and more focus could be put on the issue of political violence. So without speaking for her, obviously, because she's her own person, it's a really important part of the United Nations to promote peace, to address any type of conflict, and if there's beginnings or inklings of issues that they're raised so that they don't spread further.
Is the coming election is on the UN mandate, and how you decide all this? I mean, how headquarters decide which election is Indian mandate or not?
Okay. So in terms of mandate, I think the question is about observing the elections, right? So the UN, the United Nations in Bangladesh doesn't have a mandate to observe the elections in Bangladesh for the coming elections end of next year. It's only specific situations where election observers are deployed by the United Nations. They come normally from our office in New York. And it would have to be a decision from the Security Council or the General Assembly, or a country would have to request election observers. So none of those criteria are in place in Bangladesh. So we don't have a role. We don't have a role for the elections.
I mean, till now there is no request from Bangladesh.
No, there's no request.
So if there is no request, it will be not on the mandate.
No, absolutely not. No, there has to be a decision outside of the UN in Bangladesh. It's either, as I said, Security Council, GA, or the government of Bangladesh would have to request it.
Oh, and what if the opposition asks for it?
No, it would have to be the government who asks for it.
As you've seen, a lot of rallies are going on from the opposition and violences as well. So how stable political situation is important for particularly this Bangladesh, which is moving forwards to a certain place, and that can be earned, the stability, political stability, by dialogue or what? So
I think everybody should have ability to participate in elections, right? So whether it's young people or women or various religious groups, so plurality and engagement of everybody in elections is really important. So having open dialogue as much as possible, political parties speaking together as much as possible is ideal, because then there's less risk of violence, there's less risk of issues. So we're really keen to promote any work that we can do to help participation, to help some of that dialogue, and really to call for calm, because it is concerning that more than a year away from elections we're seeing violence. So if there's ways to avoid that, if there's ways to facilitate dialogue, obviously that's very important. But those are really decisions for people in Bangladesh to make, and we're obviously, as the United Nations, here to support, to promote plurality, to promote democracy, but the elections belong to the people here.
We all talked about the election, we talked about what's going on, we talked about Rohingya. Let's look into Bangladesh. How do you find the social inclusion and the scenario here?
So social inclusion is very interesting. Really, for me, it means leaving no one behind, right? And making sure that everybody is being taken care of. And there's certain parts of Bangladesh and the work that's being done in this country that are extraordinary. When you look at, I know, COVID vaccinations, for example, 130 million people. It's amazing. That's very inclusive. And the progress in terms of infrastructure, electricity, water is amazing as well. Over 90% of children are getting primary education. So there's huge areas of progress that have been made over the last 20, 30 years that really are astounding. I think the planning as well of the government is very strong. There's lots of push in terms of social protection and really being more inclusive of all people. So there are areas of work that have been defined already by the government where progress is being made.
So we were talking about the climate change, and we have seen only the promised by the giant countries. They haven't disbursed a single dollar for the suffering ones. How UN can make it happen?
So there's various discussions around this, and obviously as part of the COP27, which is this upcoming meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh, there's big discussions on, I think you're referring to loss and damages, where countries are asked, industrialized countries and richer countries are asked to pay because the industrialization has impacted climate, and that is impacting countries like Bangladesh. So that's a highly political conversation. It's happening between member states again, and very challenging. And I know Bangladesh is really going to push for loss and damages, to push for this agenda, because obviously the impact is very real on people and on the country. But having said that, it's not that countries are not supporting, right? There is a huge development support to Bangladesh to try and adapt the country to climate. There's also efforts to support, in response to floods. And obviously that's too late. You'd rather that they didn't happen, and you'd rather that people didn't have to go through that. But there is a humanitarian also agenda of the development community here. So that's, I think, very important. But obviously more needs to be done. I think it's been wonderful that Bangladesh has been chair with the Prime Minister of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and now we'll co-chair with Ghana, and really making sure that the voices of countries that are impacted is being heard, and that conversation continues. It's also important that we all take responsibility, because it's for our children, for our kids, it's their future. So, and young people really are, I have to say, amazing. I've been to quite a number of events where Bangladeshi youth have been talking about the upcoming meeting, and have been talking about what it means for them. And they really have extraordinary ideas and wonderful ways of thinking about things. And I think we need to do more ourselves. And they're willing to be the activists, they're willing to be the voice and to make the change.
As Bangladesh is moving to middle-income country, what is the most biggest challenge we really need to address now? What's your take or advice on that?
The biggest challenge? For me, middle-income country status is incredibly positive. It's a huge achievement. The country is almost there. The development indicators are fabulous. But it's only one step along the way to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And so that growth and that economic development really needs to be done hand in hand and consistently, along with development of the health sector, the education sector. Bangladesh has 2 million graduates every year who need to be given new opportunities, and the fourth industrial revolution is on the way, and how can we make sure that young people are engaged and they're brought into a new type of work, a new type of industry.
থ্যাংক ইউ। দর্শক, আমরা কথা বলছিলাম জাতিসংঘের আবাসিক প্রতিনিধির সাথে। তার পরামর্শ যে এই যে প্রতি বছর প্রায় 20 লাখ করে নতুন মানুষ কাজের ক্ষেত্রে আসছে, তাদেরকে যদি কাজের সাথে ইনভলভ করা যায়, তাহলেই যে মধ্যমায়ের দেশের স্বপ্ন দেখছে বাংলাদেশ, সেটি হবে টেকসই, নিরাপদ। তো দেখা হবে মুখোমুখির অন্য কোনো পর্বে অন্য কোনো অতিথির সাথে। তার আগ পর্যন্ত সুস্থ থাকুন, নিরাপদ থাকুন এবং আনন্দের সাথে থাকুন।